The stereo speakers, curved back, and the dimple of the X-line are all gone, replaced with a super thin aluminum and glass build alongside new mod attachments. This is Stephen Hall with 9 to 5 Google, and this is our full review of the new Moto Z from Lenovo. As you probably already know, the big thing here is the Moto Mods. Moto Mods are different than other attempts at modularity from other companies though, in that they don't actually involve disassembling any piece of the phone itself. As you can see, the mods are simply backplates. There's a speaker mod from JBL, a battery mod for extra battery life, some style shells, and a projector. They're really cool. But the thing that will probably first catch the eye of the consumer is their price tags, which we'll talk more about later in the review. For now, let's look at the phone itself. This thing is really well built, with aluminum rails around the sides and a back made of both aluminum and glass. There's a small antenna gap at the top and another at the bottom in the form of the USB-C port. But the most striking thing, at least when looking at the standard Moto Z, is that this handset is insanely thin. The standard Moto Z is 5.19mm thin, while the Force, which is also an incredibly thin phone, is 6.99mm thin. They're both thinner than the Galaxy S7 Edge, for example, which is 7.7mm thin, but using the standard Z somehow manages to make the Z Force feel thick. Personally, despite the downsides, I love the thinness of the Z. But what are those downsides? First, they have huge camera bumps in the back. Yes, they could have filled the backs in and gave them both better batteries, but the entire point of these phones is to be thin enough that adding Moto Mods doesn't feel unwieldy. Second, they are just not the most comfortable phones in the world. Especially compared to the smooth, curved back of the Moto X in the past, the Moto Z isn't exactly ergonomic. You'll get used to it, but at first the edges feel a little sharp. The thin style shell mods largely alleviate these two problems, and we'll talk about that more in a bit. One complaint I have about the phone's appearance involves the white fronted models. The white phone's front looks pretty rough in this reviewer's humble opinion. There are just so many small black dots, making up the front camera, the front flash, a couple of microphones, and proximity sensors, that it almost makes no sense to even make the phone in white. On the black model, thankfully, you can only really see the front-facing camera and the front flash. But one thing about the front of the device that affects both colors is the square fingerprint sensor and how large the bottom bezel is. Lenovo decided to make the fingerprint sensor just a fingerprint sensor, not a home button. That means that the phone also needs a set of Android software buttons at the bottom of the screen, making the bottom bezel appear even larger when the phone is on. The fingerprint sensor is a performer though, one of the fastest I've ever used. These 5.5-inch screens are back to AMOLED at Quad HD resolution and 535 ppi on both the Moto Z and Moto Z Force. As with most phones with AMOLED displays, you have the option to use the screen in two color modes, standard and vibrant. One thing of note with the display though is that it doesn't get very bright. It's not much worse than its competitors, but that doesn't mean it's great. Outdoor visibility is rough in broad daylight, and as you can see here, it's sometimes almost unviewable. To add to that, this is showing the Moto Z in its Gorilla Glass 4.0 screen. The Moto Z Force is even a little bit worse than this in my experience. They're great displays in most cases though. The viewing angles are good, and general usability, as long as you're not trying to use the phone in direct sunlight, is about what you would expect for a flagship. The star of the show for the Force is definitely its shatter shield screen, which while it's slightly more scratch prone, it's not going to crack on you. I've dropped the phone about a dozen times in my testing on a variety of surfaces, including carpet, tile, and hardwood. That said, it's worth remembering that the Force is by no means indestructible. You're still going to get your share of nicks and scrapes around the aluminum rails and on the back of the device, and there's always the risk of damaging internal components. So don't be too reckless. Another downside of the Moto Z versus the Moto X line is that the front of the device features one mono main speaker and earpiece combo. You can hear people fine when taking calls, but it's noticeably worse than the stereo setup from years past when watching YouTube videos or the like. And let's not forget that Lenovo has ditched the 3.5mm headphone jack with the super thin Moto Z. It's almost understandable for the thinner device to go without the jack, but sadly the Moto Z Force lacks a headphone jack as well. You're stuck using the included adapter or Bluetooth. And that takes us to software and the decisions Lenovo made in hopes to improve the experience atop Android Marshmallow. This phone is basically 90% stock Android with the exception of some custom boot logos, a transparent background in the app drawer, and a weird lock button setup. Unless you toggle a setting in the Settings app, which I quickly did for my own sanity, pressing the lock button turns the display on and off, while tapping and holding the fingerprint sensor locks the phone. The notification shade, quick settings menu, and multitasking screen are exactly the same as stock Android Marshmallow, and the phone ships with all the stock apps you would expect. As someone who's a big fan of stock Android, this makes me happy. And it's one thing that this phone has above most of the competition. You get a true Android experience without the bloat. Except for the fact that these are the Droid Edition phones from Verizon. Yes, there's a folder or two of bloatware Verizon apps that you probably don't want. There are also some awesome additions from Lenovo though, as found in the Moto app. You can go hands-free and listen to calls and texts while on the road. There's a wrist twist gesture to open up the camera app, and you can talk with the phone using a custom name even if it's locked. Moto Voice learns your voice and listens for your own custom launch phrase, and can announce your incoming calls and texts when it detects that you are driving. This isn't personally a feature that's super useful for myself, but I can definitely see people using it, especially the driving features. Another great addition is Moto Display, which has become my favorite lock screen notification experience on Android. You get a few bubbles on the active display to tap between, and you can quickly open them or dismiss them with the swipe. Performance of the phone, with its Qualcomm Snapdragon 820 processor and Adreno 530 GPU, is about the same as many of the other flagships that launched earlier this year. There's 4 gigs of RAM to handle some intense multitasking, and that it can. You can run pretty much any game on the Play Store just fine at really great frame rates, and yes, since you were wondering, it runs Pokemon Go perfectly. But something for Pokemon players especially to keep in mind is that the standard Moto Z has one big sacrifice. Its smaller 2600 mAh battery means you're going to have a hard time holding a charge with any extensive CPU and display usage. The Moto Z has a 13 megapixel main camera, while the Moto Z Force has a 21 megapixel camera. Albeit slight differences in detail when you zoom in on a photo, both cameras seem to perform about the same. They both have optical image stabilization, laser autofocus, dual tone flash, and a horde of software features to make either of them more than capable enough to be your daily snapper. As you can see here, the bundled camera app also has a robust manual mode. As for video, they both feature video stabilization, 1080p HD video, 4K video, slow motion video, and video with HDR. Based purely on my time taking some quick videos and photos around the house, they're great cameras, but there's nothing particularly special about them. Any flagship in 2016 is going to produce some great photos for you to put up on your social media accounts. Here's a quick video I made demonstrating video stabilization on the standard Moto Z. I can't finish out this review of the Moto Z without talking about the Moto Mods, the most basic of which are plastic, wood, or nylon style shells that magnetically attach to the back of the device. I really like these. They get rid of the camera bump and they make the phone more attractive and comfortable to hold, and they're only $20. Another interesting mod is the Moto Insta Projector, which was probably one of the biggest "wow, that's really cool" moments for me when I first got this review unit. The projector can project up to 70 inches in my experience, but you definitely won't get anywhere close to that number in a well-lit room. I got around 70 inches when using the projector in a pitch black room with a clean white wall. As you can see, projecting with the lights on won't be great with only 50 lumens. This mod is perfect for boardroom presentations or watching Netflix in bed. As a side note, I noticed that the little rubber grips on the bottom came up after just a couple days of use. Hopefully that's not a widespread problem. The Jbl Speaker is also really neat. It's loud and sounds great of course, but the attractive thing here is ease of use. Head into the Spotify app, play your favorite song, snap on the JBL, and your music is already playing at volume loud enough to fill a small room. There's also a kickstand, which is handy if you're in the kitchen trying to cook and need to watch a video to get some help. Having a big speaker to make up for the lack of stereo speakers also makes the JBL a great tool to have. Of the Moto Mods that are available at launch, the power packs might be the most practical, especially if you go with the standard Moto Z. If you pick the Moto Z Force, you might not need one, but the thinner device almost makes it a necessity. These work seamlessly too, just pop on the mod and your battery will begin charging. Unfortunately, these mods don't have their own charging port like the ones found on the JBL and the Insta Projector. That means to charge the power pack, you have to attach it to your phone, wait for your phone to charge, and then wait for the pack to charge. For $10 extra, you can get a power pack with wireless charging, which seems like a no-brainer to me. Finally, no matter how great these phones may be, the reality of the situation is that great phones are cheaper than ever in 2016. The $26 per month or $624 retail that Verizon wants for the standard Moto Z Droid is a lot of money. That doesn't even count for the fact that to take advantage of the Moto Z's unique capabilities, you need to pitch even more money for some mods. $60 for a power pack, $300 for a projector, and $80 for a speaker makes me feel like it would just be better to go with the standard external battery pack, Pico projector, or wireless Bluetooth speaker instead. If you do that, you'll still be able to use them in a year or two if Lenovo's take on this whole modular phone idea doesn't really take off. But who knows, maybe these mods will drop in price soon. All this said, these phones are certainly worth my own recommendation. They're great, and the Moto Mods are fun, but it's an investment. And the question still to be answered is whether or not the investment is a good one. If you don't want to take the risk on the mods, go with a thicker Moto Z Force and get a decent battery. Thanks for watching as always, and be sure to check out the description to read our full review with even more thoughts on these phones. This has been Stephen Hall with 9to5 Google, and I'll see you in the next one.